Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Michael Williams. I'm Director of the Wheeler Centre, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, which is a very special Wheeler Centre Readings Books collaboration. And Readings Association with our guest tonight is well established and long-standing. It's a great cliche of introducing these events to say that the guest needs no introduction. But it's not very often I get to say that the guest needs no Christian name, that you can just introduce them by their surname and they're accepted and embraced as a national treasure. But that's what we have tonight. I can't think of many other Australian examples, actually. Anyone? A murmur. But our guest tonight is cartoonist, poet, philosopher, artist, social commentator, thinker, national treasure, and deeply and profoundly whimsical. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Leunig.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for being here. To give up your evening is a lovely compliment to each other and to the whole situation. I can see you somewhat, and to the people at the sides, I can't quite see you. And so if I look a little bewildered, it's because I'm trying to see you. So I might get used to that as we go. But thank you for being here.
Towards the end of the event, you'll get a chance to ask some questions, and the house lights will come up. So if you could spend the next 45 minutes grooming yourselves so that you're not disappointed, not a disappointment, we'd appreciate that. Michael, congratulations firstly on the new book, which is an extraordinary kind of retrospective of a career, 40 years worth of cartoons. I was interested to note in the introduction that you said that in the past you'd resisted the description of your work as whimsical. Why was that?
I don't know. When I first heard it back in, maybe the 70s, it was, he's whimsical, that kind of thing. And that was that was all right, because it gave me a lot of freedom to do what I wanted. But I didn't quite understand what whimsical meant, in fact. And it really, I suppose I didn't trust the whim. The whim wasn't highly valued, I probably thought. Even by myself, the impulsive gesture or the spontaneous gesture that just happens, and you do it because you like it, and that's a whim, and therefore that's somehow a lesser thing than the deeply ponderous, considered kind of cartoon or whatever. But I realised I was doing these whimsical things. I was putting a duck in the drawing simply because I wanted to and I liked it, and there was no better reason, you see. I couldn't think up the profound reason. But as I've got older, I've realised the depth of that spontaneous thing. It's that you do it because it's coming from some other, deeper place probably. But I value what is whimsical, and I think some of our best strokes and words are made in a whimsical. A lot of wisdom and truth comes from the whimsical statement, and a lot of wonderful nonsense, of course.
There is something very rebellious, too, about whimsy in the context of a daily newspaper. I mean, going back to some of those early cartoons and cartooning in that context, a duck or a person with a teapot on their head was an act of rebellion. An act of rebellion against the kind of the various pressures of news.
It's true. I think there was, when these kind of little symbols appeared, it was done in the context of the seriousness and the kind of the educated commentary. I worked for a newspaper called Nation Review for quite a few years, and Nation Review was a kind of, it was read by more intellectual sort of people, I guess, or educated people, and so I kind of didn't exactly fit neatly into that at all, and it was a bit overwhelming in some respects, and it was a little rebellion against that, because I thought that was all too much, in the head, and they were neglecting the natural world, or there was some other world I was caring about. I felt belonged. It was too dry, I suppose. I mean, it was a greatly funny paper too. There was some rip-roaring organic humour in it, but I felt I wanted to put a duck in it, and that it's not being cute to do that. It's actually something I believe in, and what such things would, the natural world, I suppose. Because what journalism is often about is what the humans are doing all the time, and we're a self-obsessed species, a narcissistic, stuck in our own reflection and just reading about celebrities or politicians and just people. And it's a bad diet. It's too much human flesh, And so I felt like it was just interesting, all this other thing, the world of creatures, and I like to think that we are creatures also, and simply that. And it was just what I liked. I liked it, and that is a very bland thing to say, that you make a drawing or put something in a drawing just because you like it. But I can think of no better way to make music or art or writing than you have affection for what it is you're placing there into it.
Do you, in the process of putting this book together and revisiting that body of work, were you surprised by the early stuff? Was it the way you remembered it? Was it stuff that you were proud of and that you felt was familiar to you?
Well...
Sorry, I've changed the image behind your head while talking, and they're laughing
good.
At one of your early masterpieces that I remember fondly.
Lovely. What was the question? The question was...
about the early work.
I know what I was going to say. I was saying, look, a lot of it was... I looked at it and just threw it aside. It's not in the book, You can't work as a cartoonist for so many years to deadlines and without doing masses of horrible, appalling kind of work. And that disturbed me a bit. And I looked at it and thought, did I really do that in public? And I did, but I had to. The deadline was there and I had no choice. So it's a very humbling thing to publish this appalling stuff. It's not... you're working quickly, spontaneously, and you've got to live with it. And so it's a very humbling thing, cartooning, for some more than others. And... so that's how it was. So yeah, they were all pushed aside and they're hidden away and buried under concrete somewhere. And but it was probably disturbing in some way to go digging back. And it's funny when you call it a retrospective, it's as if, life's over and I'm looking back. Because someone in the publishing industry said, you're doing a tombstone book. And I'd never heard of this concept of the tombstone book. And maybe it is, I don't know. I might fall off the stage and hit my head. But it's a retrospective, it is. But so I go back and I'm looking at all this stuff and I start to realise how I've gone through different eras and times and news events and this war and that war and such things, and then I realised that I used to draw this character, Mr. Curly and Vasco Pyjama, and then the war comes, the Iraq War, and then after that I don't draw them anymore. And I think I got so hurt and embittered and angry with my fellow media kind of people who seem to be so for that, and I got a bit... tipped sideways and knocked off balance by all that. And so I had to go and see all of that as I put this book together.
There's so much in there that I want to kind of dig into, but the first thing I want to ask out of that is, the book's not arranged chronologically. Did you deliberately resist running it through, and would that have felt too much like an autobiography in cartoon form?
It's simply not the way I work. There's always a random quality in the way I work, and it seems to fit that there should be no chronology or lineal kind of thing, because the way I work is very random. I will start with an idea, I will have, an idea in my head, and I think, oh, great, I've got an idea for a cartoon, and there's the clock is ticking, and then I set to work to get it down, and invariably that idea in the head does not work on the paper in the hand. And it's interesting. And then I have to... So the idea was just like a doorway into what I then have to do. And what I then have to do is kind of try and find something and get in a mess. And I've talked about this a bit lately, that I go in through this idea. I quickly realise it's not working. It sort of hasn't got any mystique or no vitality or something. It's a good idea. It's clever, perhaps, or somewhat clever. But I'm looking for something else that's other than clever. And how does one find that? And you think, well, it's not a matter of going up into sort of some state of excellence and fine-tuning. It's actually regressive. It's going back downwards, and you go downwards, you regress back to an infantile state somewhat. Well, I do, when I'm working at my best, I think. And you don't get there by willing yourself there, you get there by accident. You don't want to go there, it's painful. You're sort of working in a bit of a mess, the idea hasn't worked. And you're trying to correct it, and it's only getting worse and worse, and you're getting worse and worse inside, and you feel you're hopeless, you have no right to be doing this because you can't do it. You see, you don't learn cartooning, you have to teach yourself, and it cannot be taught. I'm pretty convinced of that. And there's no method of making a cartoon that really is assured. Each time you sit down, you say, well, what am I going to do? Look at the world today. Look at me today. What's happening? And so there's this mess anyway. So you get in a mess, and you get lost in the mess, and you despair in the mess. This is when I'm working well. And I know something will happen. And the point is, I must stay with it. And I must get lost. And it's a matter of getting emotional. And your ego crumbles in this. You can't say, oh, I am a clever cartoonist. You just feel like a fool, truly. And it's infantile, but then you think about infantile, think of child, think of the way children draw, think of the way they invent, and they are at peace and at ease about it, and they're sort of enjoying themselves. And so you get so desperately sort of hopeless within yourself. And I want to add that no one will know if you're looking at me. I'm not sort of, I just look fairly composed. So then you get to the point where you think, well, what have I got to lose? I don't care anymore, and I resent this kind of work anyway, and why do I have to do it? I want to be out in the sunshine, so I'm going to start playing around. And you start playing about a bit and dabbling and doing silly things, and that's when you start to laugh a bit and have a bit of fun, and you're playing like a child. And then it happens. You start to make a move that you wouldn't make if you were being excellent and considered. You do a random primal move. You put something where it doesn't belong. You put two things together that you would never see together in this world. And you start inventing. And soon you start to recognise something really mystifies you and something you love. And you've never seen it before, and you didn't know you had it in you. In fact, you didn't have it in you. It just appeared there in the mess. So you can imagine the rest, and you see it through. You stay there, and you start making something of it and cleaning up the mess, and there's a new thing. And that, to me, is creativity. That somehow within that process is a very essence of creativity. I think the ego has to have gone a bit, and one has to regress somewhat. I think musicians might know about this. I'm not sure, but I think a lot of them might have to go through that. And it's not pleasant, but at the end is redemption. It's a redemptive process. And it's not always like that, but at its best, it's like that. So I don't know what the question was you asked anymore.
It was almost exactly what you answered, almost. That sounds incredibly tortured as a process for something that can lead to moments of beautiful, kind of quiet clarity.
Yeah. Well, you see, that particular drawing was done back in the 70s, and it couldn't have happened in the Age. The Age wouldn't have allowed this to happen, and I was fortunate to work for Nation Review with Richard Walsh, who was a wonderful editor. I would be working away trying to do some clever thing, and Richard would come to my desk and he's saying, "Hurry up, Loon, it's getting late, and what's in your rubbish bin?" And he'd go into the rubbish bin and he'd drag out a few sketches and say, "There's your drawing, there's your drawing." And sure enough, it was really, and that would be one such one, or the start of it. But then you see, why I've done that because I like it and I'm being mischievous and I'm giggling as I'm doing it. But then when it's done and I see it in the paper, I think, hang on, that's pretty wise. That's a little parable about, in our little defilement of things, we end up defiling ourselves. And, his nature, this sweet, lovely butterfly, and this man trying to be so clever. And also there's something autobiographical there. My first offence at school, when I was just a little boy, there was these very crude sort of urinals at the school, and we'd have to go out and stand there at the thing. And above was a little open window with some cyclone wire. On the other side were the school taps outside. So I saw it as my project to try and, through. And one day I got up and over and down upon a boy who was having a drink, and I was taken to the headmaster for this, and this was my first offence.
I honestly, when I was choosing a handful of my favourite cartoons for this wasn't the one I anticipated would be the autobiographical one, so I'm thrilled. Thrilled to hear that story. One of the things that strikes me about that one is the many faces on your little man are the many moods of Leunig cartoons. I mean, I remember as a kid in our house, there was always at least one Leunig on the fridge, if not many. There were, the books were on the bookshelf, and I remember sitting, kind of scouring through them, trying to understand the adult world and the various things. And one of the things I remember from those ones in the kind of through the 80s was the kind of mean people in the audience of this one. There was always something a little bit sinister, it seemed to me as a child, around the edges. Society was mean and cruel and unforgiving.
Well, yes, it can be. And I think, what are those people doing there?
They're not so mean.
But I was just going to refer to that previous one, but there's this clown and he's about to go on stage, and there's the audience, and of course this audience is not like that. And but I've heard people say, yes, they know that feeling. These are people who work in the theatre. They know that fear, or they think that they're seeing that, even though it's not like that. So, there are these... I'm drawing human nature, and it's a melodrama I'm drawing. These are kind of... I don't do caricatures of people, but maybe I caricature the emotions, and this is... I've got this thing about human nature. It is like nature. It has darkness and poisonous things, and it has beautiful things, and I think caring for this human nature, or recognising that it's nature that we're looking after when we're looking after our internal state. And I think we do a lot of damage to our internal state, unwittingly, with dire consequences. But perhaps I could draw a little something about, perhaps I could.
That's a little bit like sitting on a stage with the Beatles and them saying, perhaps I could just play one song, just one little, would you mind terribly if I indulged? Let's see if the technology works here. Yeah.
Well, you see, what I discovered when I was quite young is that I used to love drawing things properly, like photographically when I was young, but it was a bit boring after a while, and I never learned to draw, and I never went to art school. But I loved making these kind of little symbol drawings of almost hieroglyphs. So I created, somehow on my exercise books at school, I used to just create this, something like this, this thing, this humanoid sort of person like that. And it was always in profile, and it really didn't have gender as far as I was concerned. It was just didn't have an age in particular. There was no age. And if I wanted to specify gender, I would, just do something obvious like that. Just some hair, and these are sort of, it's a bit more female, a bit. So I didn't have many elements to play with, and so I'm working with emotions. So it's all melodramatic, you see, and if I wanted to make this a bit sinister, like you referred to the sinister thing before, I would just make just a little bit of a line there would make it sinister, and if that's kind of fiendish, whereas this is, I'll just try and do it. No, it doesn't work when I do that. Hang on, I'll do it there. That's more dire. This one was grinning fiendishly. This one's more dire, and I'll make this into some sort of male. Or you would go like that, still with the downcast mouth like that. And that's a bit sad. Or if you want to be really melodramatic, you would do that. And or if you wanted to just these, you would. So it's just working in and around these kind of, some sort of delight there, I don't know. Yeah, so that's all they are. And then, so it's really like writing, really. It's just a form of writing. These are like little words I'm making, hieroglyphs.
But it's amazing how distinctly you found, it would appear you found your voice so early on. I mean, you say it's like words. Well, that is distinctively Leunig. I think every person in this room recognises that with a kind of deep and abiding affection. But looking back at, and a little bit of fear, looking back over 40 years, what's amazing is those distinctly Leunig qualities are there right through.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of make it into a thing.
I choose to believe that's me.
And then, then see, you start to play. You just can't resist. You want to lean forward and do something like that on his head. Or this guy here's got a little kind of teapot on the head. I'm just going through my old repertoire. I'm like a piano player who just plays old tunes over and over. But, so I got lost. See, I got oblivious to the audience. Became oblivious to you. And that's how I was able to do it amidst all these very fine and witty people like Mungo McCallum and all those wonderful writers and people at the age. And you go into that world, the primal world, and they sort of seem to fade. And I think, what am I doing here? I don't belong here in a public place. But it's when you're doing it here, you're in a private place. And it's a very enjoyable, regressive state. And of course, I'm bringing to bear upon it, it's not just simple, because when I say I regress to an infantile state, it is understood that I have lived my life somewhat, and I have thought about things, and I have thought sensitively about things, so I know that's secure, and that's there, and that's informing. But without the infantile, or the sort of primal, I suppose, without the primal, I can't do it, because then I can't create the mystery, which I love so much, or mystique, or the enchantment. And I don't understand these things that I'm drawing a lot of the time. I really do not. And see, there's a show through there. And you see, I would sort of say, well, what's that going to be now? And I don't know. Rolf Harris would know exactly what to do. But I don't at this point. But it's a delusional state you have to be prepared to go into. And that's sort of, this lovely thing called negative capability that Keats talked about. I think it might be like that, to not know. You don't know.
That creative process you talked about before, you used the example of amusement, but that's clearly not the motivating drive for all your cartoons and all your work. Some of them, it's not about the laugh. It's about the moment of reflection or quiet contemplation or anger. As a piano player, going back to early tunes, you mentioned this man before, and the way in which you left him behind. Can you tell us a bit about Mr. Curly?
Yeah, well, that was the original drawing where I did Mr. Curly, and God knows what was happening in the news on that day. I think that was done for Nation Review, and there was probably some very dire thing about the Vietnam War, and so I somehow would have sat down with some idea, and then I would have played with this thing. I would have, we won't go to it, but probably what I demonstrated before, you just want to do something to it. You want to put something on its head, and I created this character, this curl, and then I started thinking about, this curl is like a little question mark. It's like a distinguishing quality, something that makes the person unique, but they feel foolish with their uniqueness. They feel vulnerable, and they feel odd. No one else has got a curl, and they feel deformed almost. But anyway, so I somehow built this little picture of this character who feels so odd and peculiar because he's born with this thing. And he's coming home where everything's got a curl on top. And it's all the little leaves are curly and everything's curly. And he's being welcomed, the animals have got curls. So it's this kind of self-acceptance thing, really, and realising that nature's full of curls. And, of course, inevitably there's a quantum physicist who walks up to you one day and says, do you realise that's exactly what is it the Fibonacci sequence is? It's a mathematical sequence. Many people will know it, obviously. It's got something, it's some mathematical formula for the curl or the unfolding or the unfurling. Maybe I've got it all wrong, but... and then the curl is just a nice thing to make with a pen anyway. I mean, it's lovely. It's just a lovely thing to do, you know.
Do you doodle a lot?
Oh, yeah.
It sounded like a ruder question when I said it out loud. But
I do. And I'm always fascinated with people doodle on the phone. They used to when they had phones on desks with bits of paper, but now they have these phones. But it's a lovely thing. The hand wants to make marks, except in our kind of modern world. I don't know whether many mature age people draw too much or know the pleasure of just drawing, because there's always a strict school teacher saying that doesn't look like a horse, you know, or that's not right. You can't draw. He can draw, but you can't draw. And I resist this utterly. I love to think that we could all, it's just another dimension we might go into, or to paint. I've been in Indigenous communities in art centres and work there and trying to, just help people with painting. Not that I know about painting, but I'm talking about making them a cup of tea when they're painting or putting the pots of paint out and all that. And to watch Indigenous people, the old people particularly, pick up a brush who've never done it much, except in sort of ceremony and that, where there's body painting done. The enjoyment and the freedom to paint and make mark, and that it's physical and it's organic. And I think we're very cerebral people, and that's a bit sad. We do music a bit better, but making marks is something I think is just so lovely, and you don't have to drive anywhere in a car. It's very cheap, and it's so satisfying and beautiful, but don't try and be a human photocopier. Just make funny marks, and it's lovely. And colour is a beautiful thing. It's so primal.
Makes me feel like I'm a better drawer than I am, but I know that that's not my forte. But for you, the art is one thing and the beautiful creation, but you are also you would appear to be a fiercely political person, a person with a strong social conscience who has things that he wants to say. Do you find, do those impulses come into conflict, the artist and the kind of passionate commentator?
Well, I realised I was more of an artist than I was a political cartoonist. I approached it artistically, and I think I sort of believe it's true that the artist wants to express what is repressed. To express what is repressed. That's the work of one of the real work of the artist, and what is repressed within us culturally, whether that be some pain that's repressed, or a joy, or a delight, or beauty that is repressed. And so the artist, I think, a good artist is making a kind of maybe proposing, maybe there's a different way of living, there's a different mindset you can have. There's such a conformity of the mindset which the artist finds oppressive and worrisome in the community, the tendency to conform and to be like each other. And I think this is taught in education unwittingly. And the media does it in this world of fashion and style, and we do have a tendency to conformity and to repress our unique peculiarities in order to be acceptable and attractive. This cult of being attractive is so deadening. So I think the artist is doing that, always proposing and opening up some other possibility, or giving a glimpse, or enchanting us towards another state of mind somewhat. And that should be allowed in a newspaper, I'm not sure is right. I still feel a little awkward in newspapers.
Do you look back over these 40 years of cartoons and look at individual cartoons and remember being angry about something, or remember being...
Yes.
How often was that a trigger for a cartoon?
Oh, it was. And sometimes if you go into it too angry, it can tip you off balance, these emotions. And I have found the wars in recent times, the ongoing war, wherever it is, there's a war going on. And I got angry, not so much, the war itself is appalling, but as I've said in a cartoon that's in that book, depressing things happen in pairs. There's the first appalling, depressing thing, and then the second one, which is people's indifference to it, or that it's acceptable somehow, and no one seems to care, or it would seem that way. And there's this kind of beaten, powerless loss of innocence about this, which I think is a deadened state. I think it's depressive or something to not care if a world superpower like America and Australia join in to bomb the shit out of a city, and I use a phrase there that I heard an old pilot from World War II say. I'd just come back from Bali, and he said, I bombed the shit out of Denpasar during the war. I'd just been in Denpasar, and I thought, oh dear. That happened. I still reel at that. As I sit here, I feel aghast still that happened. And not just that it happened, but that so many of my contemporaries and my colleagues thought it was a jolly good idea and seemed to promote it. And I wonder, what the hell was I thinking all these years? I didn't see that coming, that they would be like that. And I couldn't help but think there was something essentially sadistic in spite of all the political rationale. I don't think you can make war without sadism in the population. The primal bit. You need a primal bit. And then so I get angry about that, and then I have to investigate it and try to understand it. And I got very alienated by it. And then you get terrible mail from the war people and the militarist people. They are quite something to deal with in the letters they send. I mean, the religious people are one lot, and I've offended many religious people unwittingly, not wanting to, because it's like children offend you, and they don't want to offend you. They've just done something that they think's natural. But the military people, you know, they're awful what they will threaten you with for just standing up and saying, this is appalling. This is madness. And yeah, wow.
It is extraordinary. I do remember your cartoons in The Age during that period of the Iraq War, and the fury in them, and the kind of the clear-eyed disdain for often editorial articles that were appearing on the same page as your cartoons. That kind of loss of faith in the environment in which you were publishing, that must have been very hard to come back from.
I'm not sure that I ever did. I'm not sure that I did, and I think I lost faith substantially in the media and journalism. And while I wasn't alone in this, but there was a tiny minority, and people felt silenced and they shouldn't speak up. And they dreaded that feeling of, this is appalling. But I went into the primal state. I said, this is the most primal thing you can do, is kill people like this. And they knew it would be doing that. And of course, it all ended up appalling, and it all went the different way. As any intelligent person would have known, it would all be just an atrocity, and still is. See, I'm getting worked up about it now. I just can't comprehend. It's like the incomprehending child still in me is saying, why? How does this happen? Anyway, but we're supposed to be detached, aren't we, and analytical. And that's how you write your way out of your emotions and make commentary, and you comment your way away from your truth. And then you wonder why society's going to the dogs, And it's about love too, isn't it not? Where is the love? You can't use that word in journalism too much unless it's, I love the coffee there. I love that film. But the quality of love in politics. Someone asked me today at an interview, they said, what's happened to politics? Why is it going like that? And I don't know what I said, but I think I said there should be a royal commission into why it's gone like that. And then, but I thought later, there is some absence of love. And once in the old days, they would have called it patriotism, love of your people, of your culture, trying to make it better. It's as if no one loves it anymore.
Why, as a position, has this brought such kind of controversy your way? I mean, after September 11, you did a cartoon that broadly suggested that a compassionate view towards terrorists, towards Osama bin Laden, might be advisable, that to feel love for one another. Yeah. Why was that the most controversial thing that someone could say, do you think?
Yes, that was treated with utter outrage. And, people like Gerard Henderson and even Clive James got totally stuck into me and said what a naive fool I was, and they were going to come and get me. Not they were, that Osama was going to, he would come and get you. Why are you putting up with him? I mean, there's still no evidence that Osama had anything to do with that, or that, in fact, the fella, whoever they killed or didn't kill, was Osama. I don't know. I don't get it. What could you believe?
I'm looking forward to this video going on the internet and the hate mail that we're going to get, so that's good. That's going to be fun.
No, hate mail. Oh, tell me about it. I've had a bucket loads of it this week. But
well, Gaza's much in the news at the moment, and obviously you've managed to comprehensively offend certain sectors of the pro-Israel community. Is that something that is that a fight you were looking for? Or
no, of course not. I mean, it's not easy to hurt people's feelings, whatever their feelings are. It's not easy. But, I'm just trying to fill the gap. There's something not being said, was not being said enough in the last few weeks, in my view, and in not just my view, in a lot of people's view. And I just said that, and I wasn't alone. I think Bruce Petty said something. And you're going to get it. You're going to get it in the neck. But what do? Was it so bad what I said? Was it so bad?
While we're on the topic of controversies, this was a cartoon from about 15 years ago, a bit less, that provoked. I don't know if the audience can read it, but I suspect many of you will remember it.
There was a child lying in the early learning centre, it's now called. But it was called the creche, yeah. It was a creche child. Now, this was seen... You would like me to talk about those?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, yeah.
It'll be fun. I'm keen to win over as much of this crowd as possible.
That caused me a lot of trouble and still does. And it was seen to be just some whimsical thing. I was in some kind of bad mood and I was being some kind of, a misogynist or something. But no, I had thought a lot about this. I had read a lot about this. I had read extensively the work of D.W. Winnicott on early childhood development and what happens at the very start to the child. And so there was a lot of learning, I suppose, behind that. And it seemed to me at the time there was a fundamental change happening in the way children are starting out in life, and the personality is formed at the beginning. And I'm wondering, so I thought this was a really important issue, and I wanted to say something. And this is, in fact, a kind of a depiction of what may be happening within. Well, this baby is being given words to its feelings, and of course it wouldn't have normally. It's pre-language, but it's going through an emotional state. Now, it's not necessarily like that, but it can be. And I did this knowing that women have there's a lot of women don't have a choice. They have to work. It's not easy for some. It varies. And I think, look, I'll never be able to say anything if I have to think of everybody. If it causes some upset or guilt, I think that's not so bad. People can get over guilt. Guilt is simply a feeling of feeling responsible, or it's not necessarily bad. To bring up children on guilt, that's terrible. That's the bad guilt, when you make people feel guilty and little children feel guilty. We all should feel guilty or concerned. I think it's a good thing to have concern. And I'm not saying this is right. It's being a catalytic idea, and aren't we a community of ideas? And it did create a huge debate. Or it was a stimulant to that. It caused a couple of people to write books that started out at this point. And it caused all sorts of stuff. And to this day, women come up and said, "Oh, you really hurt me with that." But I had a big discussion with all my girlfriends and they talked about it. And some of us changed our view and we thought about it differently. So that's what my work is, you see. My work is, the cartoonist is advocating, an advocate somewhat for the powerless, or, the unattractive, or the unresourced, or the people who are not armed well. And that's what the cartoonist is speaking for.
Does that inadvertent kind of outcome, though, give you pause? I mean, for the conversations that generated and everything else, the fact that you unintentionally caused that hurt or that guilt where that wasn't your intention, does that make you think twice the next time you pick up the pen?
Yeah. I think a lot of hurt, a lot of offence is unintentional. It's a kind of naivety sometimes, because community is a big complex thing and people have all sorts of sensitivities that I'm not thinking of so much. And then I think, yeah, but what's so bad? It's only a cartoon. It's not a piece of legislation. It's not like an edict. It's only an idea. And I think people can get too concerned about this. But look, I think it's very important. And of course, motherhood and parenthood is so complex and so difficult. And it's, whatever way you do it, it's troublesome and it's hard and it's difficult. And for me to go in there seems so arrogant in a way, but it's not. I was a father at the time. I've had 4 children. I've been through this from a father's perspective, and I care about it. And so it's done in conscience and with gravity in my heart. But it's kind of like the dentist, the dentist is going to hurt your tooth. But he's not out to get you or make you feel guilty.
You haven't met my dentist.
Oh, I might have.
It's all about guilt, I think. But, it must be extraordinary for you at this point of your career to realise the impact the clarity with which you expressed. I love this cartoon. It makes me laugh every time I look at it. But, you know, the power that your ideas have, the way in which there are whole communities of people who look to you for moral guidance, for a moment of calm. You don't accept that?
No, I don't. No, I can't imagine that, honestly. I can't. It just seemed... Look, as I said, did I say before that I had an appalling sort of an education, academically speaking? I enjoyed school. I failed, as I've said 1,000 times, I failed year 12 when I sat for it, and when I repeated it, I failed it worse than the first time. So I failed it twice, and it's not easy to do that. So, you see, you develop a sort of a cringe, and you see all your friends go on to university, and they have tweed jackets with leather things on the thing, and, you know, they discuss philosophy and books in Norton's Hotel and stuff, and I used to stand around the edges, and that's where I met Mark Rubbo. And he was standing on the edges a bit like me, but he needn't have. I think he was a far more educated person than I. But we're not here to talk about Mark. He's probably cringing now.
That's tomorrow night. Discussions about Mark Rubbo at the Capitol. Yeah, no, it stuck with me, the fact that there's a sense of unentitlement I had to overcome. And so it's been a little bit of a cowboy exercise for me. I had to just say, well, I'm just going to do something. I had an irrepressible, a little expressive side that I felt I wanted to make something. I wanted to put something forward. There's something theatrical in being a cartoonist. And in fact, that square around that, it's like a stage. We're sitting in a cartoon frame. It's a proscenium march. And you put your little characters in there and they say things, and you're doing it as an offering, not to be an influence. You're not to wanting to be some wise guy at the beginning. And you see, it just happens like this. I was desperate to get a job of some sort, and someone said, look, I'll pay you $5. It might have been Pete Steedman, the old newspaper editor, said, I'll pay you $5 to do another one, a cartoon like that. So you start doing that, and you get a gig here and a gig there, and soon a newspaper wants you to work, and a newspaper editor says, would you be able to do 6 cartoons a week? I was like, yep, I can do that. You know you can't. And it just gradually grows, so it's an organic development. And one day you're sitting on the stage of the Capitol Theatre talking as if you know something. And this is where I used to come as a child with my grandma and sit and watch a film, you know. And so I can't imagine that I'd be sitting on the stage. So I take it lightly, I hold it lightly. I'm serious, but I hold it fairly lightly, and I have another life, and I adore being in nature and in the farm, and I come from a long lineage of manual labourers and workers, and I still love to do that. So it's very balancing, and I can't take it seriously. But I accept any responsibility I can, and I care for my community and my society. And it's like being a volunteer. You just do your bit for what it's worth. That's how I view it. But I can't get into the zone of feeling like I've got some, you know, position or something, because I've never won an award for it, and I've never entered for an award for it. I don't do that sort of thing. And I don't like those kind of hierarchies. It's against my artist's creative impulse. I don't go in for that. But I do respect people of learning and education if they're, you know, I do respect Given that
things.
Reluctance for hierarchy, could you form an orderly line behind the microphones to ask questions of Michael, who's on the stage, and more important than all of us in this room?
Look
at that, there's people here, I told you. There are 3 fixed microphones, 2 down here near the stairs, and then 1 up at the higher level. You will need to make your way to the microphone rather than the microphone coming to you, I'm afraid, in this venue. And ask your questions of Michael. What a frightened crowd. It's extraordinary, they're afraid. Can I ask, just off the back of...
There is a question.
Someone's making their way to a microphone right now. Sorry, everyone watch this person try and get through. I'm concerned it might not be awkward enough already. Oh, we're there.
Just talking. thanks very much, Michael. You've talked a lot about your drawings tonight, and I just wondered if you'd say a little bit about your poetry, please.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I've forgotten that I'm also a writer. That's it. In the poetry, I once was at a deadline, once again, couldn't think of what a serious thing to say, and I wrote this little verse. This is in the early 70s, I wrote a verse. It was, "Come sit down beside me," I said to myself, and although it doesn't make sense, I held my own hand as a small sign of trust, and together I sat on the fence. And then I made a little drawing, and it went in the paper, and the editor was bewildered as usual. And it was forgivable because it had a drawing. Otherwise, it was just sentimental, light verse or something. And that has always been levelled against me. Oh, well, you don't do poetry, you just do sentimental, light verse, or it's... And you know, my generation is the educated part of my generation is incredibly hostile to any suggestion of sentimentality. And whereas I say, look, it's okay, your grandmothers or grandparents probably talked sentimental verse. Well, where I came from, they did, and it was your only accent. It was a little bit of lyricism, you see, and so it was my mother tongue in some way. I was exposed to a lot of sentimental songs and verse, and I think within it there is more in it than would meet the eye. If you really speak the lingo, if you're fluent, you can impart really complex and profound ideas in it. So I'm not afraid of it. And then I kept making these little videos, and they're really light-hearted things, and sometimes I get carried away. And
but also as an extension of that, when the Sunday Age came into being, you formed a relationship where you would write the prayer rather than do a cartoon on a Sunday. And that, in its way, was another poetic project.
Well, that's right, and that was a poetic project because I was interested in this form called prayer. What is this? And you know, we grew up as kids. There was prayers going on here, there, and everywhere, and it was kind of nice. And there was a private aspect of prayer. There was something honest about prayer. It wasn't literary as such, and it sort of had personal honesty and something serious and heartfelt in prayer. So, and then many of these got set to music, and then now I hear them being sung by choirs and the like. And that's lovely, that how things transfer and someone else picks up what you've done and make it into another thing, and so it goes. So I love work that becomes useful. It becomes useful. And a woman, I think psychotherapists and the like sometimes have used my work. And a woman told me just yesterday, she said, "Oh, your work helped me so much in this very bad time in my life." And there was a particular image, and I said, "Oh, I wonder what that was." And I'm thinking she's going to say something with some message in it, you know, but no, it was simply a drawing, and it was a little child sitting in a small boat on a very wild, dark sea, clutching desperately to a duck. And she said, that image just saved my life, and I used to have it with me often. And so I started to see how imagery works for people and what I'd been doing. I'm starting to understand if there's been any value in my work. I'm starting to understand it better. But it was done intuitively. It wasn't meant to be helpful necessarily. It was just, oh, here is this. And yeah, obviously there's been some... That's how the poetry has worked. And it's a lovely form that just transfers, and it's brief, and people use it and enjoy it to the extent they do. It's enjoyable to do. Yeah. But it's not literary. It doesn't belong in the literary world, it seems. And I'm always conscious of this high art world and the literary world, which is beautiful. And it's mad also, and pretentious sometimes, and so am I pretentious sometimes. But it's just different. I'm conscious of this kind of very serious, more academic world, which I feel I'm not part of.
There are too few ducks in that world, I think it's safe to say.
Michael, my name is John. Thank you so much for sharing what you've been having to say this evening. You mentioned a little earlier on about whimsy and the idea of your regressive creative space. Do you feel that that is something that, as a community, people should be encouraging more of, or is it something that is better self-sought out and this rebel sort of chasing thing that you mentioned for yourself?
That last sentence, what was that? I didn't quite pick up the last bit you just said.
Is it better for whimsy to be encouraged as a community or self-sought after?
Well, I would think that spontaneity and this whimsy, I mean, people do it. People are pretty good at it around their home or around the kitchen table. But it's just that it's divided off. It's hived off and said, you look at the political world, how there's no chance of whimsy there. Everything's so calculated and sort of digested, and it's control. And I think we're increasingly feeling controlled and conforming and sort of politically corrected too much, possibly, in silly ways instead of intelligent ways. And the whim can get you into a lot of trouble, and people are very cautious of getting into trouble or to be badly thought of. You might do a slur. This word slur, everyone seems to be doing a slur, you read the paper and then someone has to make an apology because they offended someone. I think, yeah, well, fair enough, but where does it stop? And so people are frightened of this thing maybe, and they just close up. And anything that causes people to close up is sad. Whim and spontaneity. I felt Australia was a more whimsical society once. We're very, very getting tighter at the moment in some ways, and therefore more lawless in a way. It comes out as a kind of a destructive form or something now in some young people. And I don't know. I won't go there, but yeah, of course it's to be encouraged at every turn, and you encourage it by just doing it yourself, I guess.
I mean, the other thing that struck me looking through the 400 cartoons in this collection is playfulness, even in the melancholy ones or the angry ones or that thing of play seems almost more important than whimsy to me.
Play. Well, play is whimsical, isn't it? And this thing of doing what it is in good conscience or in good faith that you like, that you enjoy. I often think making a cartoon or making a book or making a poem is a bit like cooking. It's a bit like cooking. Sometimes I read someone's book or their writing and I think, if they were a cook, would I be able to eat this, because when you're cooking, you're saying, I think that needs some more oregano. Sort of bit more of that, or a bit more lemon juice there, or something like this. And so I like to think that writing is like this, or making something. You're making it to be delicious in some way, or strong, or whatever. So there's whim in that. This sort of intelligent whim, this lovely idea, for getting ideas, for inventing things, for creating. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I wanted to let you know that as a 42-year-old, I've probably noticed your cartoons all my life, and I wanted to acknowledge you for how honest you've been tonight, but also honesty in what you share and what you write and what you draw, because I think we are very serious, and you've allowed us to be able to laugh at ourselves and cry as well. Do you notice, there'll be a lot of people who thank you, but do you really notice the feedback that comes back to you? Does that fill your heart as much as what you feel others?
I appreciate your sentiment there. It's difficult to answer. I'm not sure. Once again, I'll revert to childhood. I keep going back there, don't I? Because I think these feelings you have at the start of life are still with you somewhere, hopefully. And those are kind of true feelings. But the feeling I refer to is that a child comes into the world and he thinks, I belong here, hopefully. I think a good enough start implies, I belong, I have a voice, I want the neighbour knows who I am and says, hello, Michael, the little Michael, or whatever. So you have this natural expectation, and as you grow, you realise the world's far bigger than that. But still, the desire to just belong and to speak to others is almost an innocent, childlike desire. And I think that's what I feel. I don't feel I wanted to do this. I just feel it's natural to be a friend of your society. It's just a natural, eternal hope every child would have, that they belong, that they are friends with everybody. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but it's as if it's a primal need and an expectation which somehow persists in me. So it seems that what I'm doing is natural, and I'm surprised that everyone doesn't want to do the same thing. And I don't know what it is I am doing entirely. Honestly, making this book has made me reflect about, well, what have I been doing all these years? And I'm only just starting to understand it, really, because when you put a book, the Tombstone collection, together, you detach, you move away, you're getting something piled up in a heap, and you look at it and you see it differently, and it's detached, and it's probably doing it so I can move to other parts, other chapters of life and other creativity. And so what I've done is just natural, and I would think it's natural for anybody to want to speak to their society and be heard by their society. But of course, I understand that it's not like that, and I wish it were, and I think it should be more so, that we do all have a voice that is heard and taken seriously. And I've often thought how funny it is that I wanted probably deep down to be taken seriously. So what did I do? I took to making jokes. And it's a funny thing, that. But I hope I've answered what you're saying, but I thank you for your thoughts.
I'm a little bit appalled that your publisher used the phrase tombstone book, but I'm confident that publishers more than anyone else know that a tombstone book can happen in many volumes, and I suspect this is just volume 1 of an ongoing tombstone book that we're going to see. The Essential Leunig, which you all now have a copy of, courtesy of Readings Books, which is a very good thing. The Essential Leunig, I expect in 40 years you'll be releasing the Inessential Leunig, and we'll get that book as well, which will be a lot of fun. Please join me in thanking the extraordinary Michael Leunig.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you.